She sang a lullaby to a crying child on the plane, not knowing the father was a billionaire widower. The lights were dimmed low, casting a faint amber glow across the cramped rows of the late-night flight from Denver to Boise. Outside, the sky stretched endlessly, a black velvet curtain stitched with stars. Inside, the stillness was fractured by the piercing cries of a baby. Ava had been crying since takeoff. The sharp wail of the 9-month-old rose and fell. Relentless and raw, it cut through the quiet hum of the plane like a siren. Passengers shifted in their seats, groaning. Some turned with irritation. Others muttered louder than they realized. "Is anyone going to do something?" 3 rows back. "It hasn't stopped for 30 minutes. Poor kid." "But even poorer us." Graham Whitaker cradled his daughter in his arms, bouncing gently, whispering words she did not understand. His eyes, rimmed with exhaustion, scanned the cabin as if a solution might appear. Nothing worked. Bottles, pacifiers, rocking, walking the aisle, all useless. His grip tightened slightly, though he was careful not to show frustration. He had learned that babies sense tension, and he carried enough to fill a canyon. It was not just exhaustion. It was grief. Grief wrapped itself around Graham like a second skin. It clung to every word he tried to offer his daughter. Since the day her mother died giving birth, he had lived trying to be both parents and still feeling like he was failing at just one. Tonight, the failure felt loud. Ava would not stop crying, and he had no idea how to help her. In economy class, near the window seat, Linda Bennett sat quietly, trying to remain invisible. Her worn denim jacket was pulled up around her shoulders, and a weathered book lay open in her lap, though her eyes had not moved across a page in 10 minutes. She clutched a soft handkerchief, edges frayed from years of use, initials stitched in delicate thread. M.B., her grandmother's, the only person who had ever made Linda feel truly safe. As Ava's cries echoed again, Linda winced, not from annoyance, but something deeper. A memory surfaced, slow and aching. She was 5 again, curled beneath a quilt in a tiny attic room. The scent of lavender, her grandmother humming a lullaby. Linda blinked back the sting in her eyes. Without realizing, her lips began to move softly, a melody, barely a whisper. She sang it the way she remembered hearing it in the dark when no one else could hear her cry. She was not singing for Ava. She was singing for the little girl she used to be. Then silence. The baby's cries stopped. The shift was immediate and complete. A hush fell over the cabin like a collective breath. Linda stopped singing, eyes wide. Around her, passengers stirred, confused and curious. Some leaned forward, looking down the aisle. Graham froze. He felt it the second Ava's tiny body relaxed against his chest. No more thrashing limbs. No more sobs clawing from her throat. Just steady breath and the faintest hiccup. He looked down, stunned. Then up. The sound had come from behind him. A soft, unfamiliar voice. He turned gently in the aisle, searching. 4 rows back, he saw her. Blonde hair tucked behind one ear, a book in her lap, and a surprised look on her face like she had not expected to be seen. He approached slowly, careful not to disturb the peace he had barely dared hope for. When he reached her row, Linda's eyes met his. She tensed, unsure if he was upset or grateful or both. Graham's voice was quiet, almost embarrassed. "I don't know what you just did," he said, voice rough from emotion and fatigue. "But can you do it again?" Linda blinked. Her instinct was to shrink back, to apologize for making a sound, for inserting herself into someone else's moment. But there was something in his eyes. Desperation, yes, but also something else. Trust. "I was just," she began, then paused. "It's a lullaby my grandmother used to sing to me." She glanced at Ava, now dozing peacefully against his chest. "I didn't mean to intrude," she said softly. "You didn't," Graham replied. You helped her in a way I couldn't, and I really need help right now." Linda hesitated. Then she nodded. Would you mind coming up to my seat?" Graham asked, his voice low. "Careful. It's not for me. It's for her." Linda looked down at the sleeping baby in his arms. Ava's tiny fingers clutched the edge of his shirt, her cheeks still damp with tears, but peaceful now, as if she had found a quiet harbor after a violent storm. Linda's heart squeezed. She hesitated. Walking into business class, where she clearly did not belong, made her palms sweat. She wore old jeans, a stretched sweater, and shoes long past their prime. She did not fit that world. Graham saw it in her eyes. "Please," he said gently. "Just for a moment. You don't have to stay long." Linda nodded slowly. She followed him up the aisle, catching curious glances from other passengers. Some smiled, others just looked relieved. The crying had stopped. A flight attendant stepped aside, nodding as Linda entered the cabin. Graham gestured to the empty seat beside his. It was wide and untouched. She sat stiffly, unsure where to put her hands. Ava stirred, her face twitching, a whimper starting. Without thinking, Linda leaned forward, arms instinctively out. "May I?" Graham hesitated a beat, then nodded and placed Ava gently into her arms. Linda adjusted the baby's position, cradling her the way she used to hold her little cousin after seizures. She had no training, no techniques, just memory, and a heart that remembered what it was to be scared and small. She held Ava close and began to hum again. Her voice was soft, airy, like a whisper on wind. Each note carried something intangible. Warmth, presence, a quiet kind of love. Ava melted into her chest almost instantly. Her breathing steadied. Her fingers curled into Linda's sweater. She sighed and then she slept deeply, peacefully. The cabin, tense for hours, exhaled. The flight attendant's eyes welled up. A man across the aisle leaned back and whispered, "That's the best magic I've seen in years." Graham stared. He did not know what stunned him more, Ava sleeping or the woman who made it happen. No fanfare, no performance, just a quiet girl with tired eyes who had done what no nurse, nanny, or specialist could. "Thank you," he said softly. Linda smiled. "Shy, she's easy to love." Graham reached into the seat compartment and pulled out his jacket. Without a word, he draped it over her shoulders. She froze, surprised by the gesture. "It's cold," he said, almost apologetic. "You're keeping her warm. Let me do the same for you." Linda blinked quickly and nodded. They sat in silence. The cabin dimmed around them, Ava's tiny breaths rising and falling between them. "She reminds me of someone," Graham said, voice low. "The way she looks when she sleeps, it's familiar." Linda looked down at Ava's face, lips parted, hand curled near her cheek. "My grandmother used to sing that lullaby to me," Linda said. "It was the only thing that helped me sleep. I was scared a lot back then. I guess I never forgot how it made me feel." "She must have been special," Graham said. "She was," Linda whispered. "She made me feel safe." Graham opened his mouth, then stopped. His throat tightened. Something in her voice, its warmth, the way it wrapped around the melody, struck him deep. It was not just the lullaby. It was how she sang it. He had not heard that voice in almost a year. Not since Lillian sang to their unborn daughter, smiling through the pain. Linda's voice echoed that same quiet love. Graham turned slightly, blinking fast. But Linda saw the tear slip down his cheek. He said nothing. He did not have to. Because in that moment, Linda understood. Some grief ran too deep for words. Some connections could only be explained by silence and a lullaby that, for the first time in months, brought peace. The wheels touched down with a soft bump, and the familiar hum of the cabin shifted as the plane slowed, rolling toward the gate. Overhead lights flickered on, brighter now, breaking the gentle hush that had blanketed the last hour of the flight. Linda stirred, pulling Graham's jacket tighter around her shoulders before carefully adjusting Ava in her arms. The baby was still asleep, her lips parted, her tiny hand tangled in the hem of Linda's sweater. Linda looked down one last time, a soft smile brushing her lips. She gently passed Ava back to Graham, who accepted his daughter as if she were made of porcelain. His fingers brushed Linda's as he took the baby from her, and he held her gaze for a second longer than necessary. "Thank you," he said again. His voice was quiet, but not empty. It carried something weightier this time, something unspoken. Linda gave a small nod, not trusting herself to speak. She could already feel that familiar sensation blooming in her chest, the one that always came right before goodbye. Passengers began to gather their things, pulling bags from overhead compartments, shuffling forward in tired lines. The stillness that had briefly bound them together unraveled into routine. Linda stood, shrugged off his jacket, and hesitated before handing it back. "It was warm," she said simply. Graham smiled faintly as he took it, folding it over his arm, watching her carefully. Linda turned to go, but paused. She opened her mouth as if to say something, anything. But instead, she offered him a quick, almost apologetic smile, then stepped into the aisle. She moved fast, weaving through the line of passengers, head down, her bag already slung over her shoulder. She never looked back. By the time Graham realized he had not asked her name, she was gone. He stood at the edge of the aisle. Ava nestled against his chest, still half asleep. His mouth opened, but the words never formed. He hesitated, the weight of everything he should have said pressing into his chest. He could have called out. He did not, and the moment passed. Linda exited the airport alone, stepping into the cool morning air of Boise. Her feet hit the pavement, her heart oddly full and strangely hollow at the same time. People like her did not stay in the stories of men like that. She knew how this went. She had always been the quiet person in the background, a flicker in someone's night, a momentary comfort, nothing more. She wrapped her arms around herself and headed for the bus stop, trying not to think too hard about the warmth of Ava against her chest or the way Graham had looked at her as if she mattered. Later that afternoon, she unlocked the front door of the bookstore where she worked. She hung her coat, made tea, and prepared for story time with the local kids. She never knew she had left behind something more than silence. She never knew that somewhere across town, a man was still thinking about the way her voice had carried his daughter to sleep and stayed. The small bookstore sat on the corner of a sleepy street in downtown Boise. Its window painted with falling leaves and hand-lettered quotes about the magic of stories. Inside, the air was warm with the scent of old pages, vanilla candles, and soft rain tapping against the glass. Linda sat on a low stool in the children's corner, a hardcover book open in her lap. A little girl with red curls leaned against her knee, eyes wide as Linda read in a gentle voice. 3 other children sat cross-legged on a bright rug, listening as if the story held all the secrets of the universe. Outside, Graham stood frozen on the sidewalk, his hand resting against the door. He had not planned this. He had flown into Boise that morning for a last-minute business meeting with a local farm partner. After lunch, he had taken a walk, needing space and fresh air. He had passed coffee shops, boutiques, and then this. He had not even seen the store's name. All he had seen was her, Linda. Her hair was pulled back loosely. She wore the same soft sweater from the plane. She smiled as she read, laughing gently at the funny parts, her voice as warm and quiet as he remembered. He stood there far too long, Ava's face flashing through his mind. The peace, the stillness, the way she had settled so effortlessly against this stranger's chest. Not a stranger anymore. Graham finally stepped inside. A soft bell above the door chimed. Linda looked up, her eyes widened, and for a moment she just stared. Then she smiled. A real unguarded smile, the kind that made the whole room shift. He walked slowly through the shelves, picked up a children's book and bought it without reading the title. He scribbled a note on the back of the receipt. When Linda finished the story and the children scampered off with their parents, the shop quieted again. She stood and returned the book to the shelf only to find a piece of paper folded and resting on the counter. She recognized the handwriting instantly. "Thank you for singing my daughter to sleep in the dark. Gee." Linda turned toward the door and he was still there. They stood looking at each other for a long second, the space between them, holding more than either of them knew how to say. "Hi," she said, her voice soft. "Hi," he replied, almost laughing at how simple it felt. They walked to a cafe just down the block, the kind with chipped mugs and mismatched chairs. Graham ordered tea. Linda chose chamomile. The rain outside began to fall harder. They talked not about work or jobs or titles, about childhood and music, about their grandmothers, about the night on the plane. Linda was quieter than Graham remembered. She still kept her hands curled loosely in her lap as if unsure what to do with them. But she looked at him when she spoke, really looked. He watched her carefully, noting how her shoulders relaxed when she laughed, how her voice grew a little stronger with each passing minute. It was not dramatic. It was not romantic in the grand cinematic way. It was easy. Linda sipped her tea and glanced out the window. Then she looked back at him. "Do you ever think," she asked, "that someone might actually stay, that they might not just pass through your life, but really choose to stay?" Graham's fingers tightened slightly around his mug. He looked at her, eyes steady. "I used to think no," he said. "After losing Lillian, I thought everyone was just passing through. Temporary, conditional." He paused. "But then I heard your voice and I saw the way Ava responded to it, like she recognized something I had forgotten existed." He exhaled slowly. "Since then, I've started to believe again." Linda held his gaze. She did not smile right away, but her eyes softened and something flickered behind them. Hope maybe, or trust, blooming gently like a candle lit against the dark. Graham had meant to leave Boise after 2 nights. The meeting that had brought him there was finished, his schedule waiting back in Montana. But somehow each morning another reason appeared to stay. The next day he met Linda at the park. She sat on the grass with Ava in her lap, holding a yellow leaf against the baby's palm. The child stared at it in fascination, babbling softly. When she spotted Graham, she reached out her arms, squealing with recognition. "See, she remembers you," Linda said, laughing. "Or maybe she remembers your voice," he teased. They began to meet every day after that. At the library, Linda led Ava through the children's section, showing her picture books and animal toys. At the bookstore, Ava sat on Linda's knee during story time, her small hands clapping at the sound of other kids giggling. In the evenings, they stopped by a quiet diner near the river, sharing simple meals and easy conversation. No one spoke about what any of it meant. They did not have to. It was something softer than romance, an unspoken rhythm, a quiet companionship that required no promises. Linda never tried to fill silence with words. Graham never tried to impress her with his success. They simply existed in the same space, and somehow it was enough. Sometimes Graham would catch himself watching her when she was not looking. She always seemed half in the world, half in memory, her eyes holding a kind of peace that only came from surviving loss. He recognized it because he wore the same look. On the 3rd afternoon, the sky hung low and gray. They sat by the lake, Ava between them, playing with pebbles. Linda picked one up small and smooth and handed it to Ava. "Feel that? It's cool now, but if you hold it long enough, it becomes warm," she said quietly. "Everything warms with touch." Graham smiled faintly. "I think you're right." As the breeze picked up, Ava began to fuss. Linda gathered her gently and started humming, the lullaby. The melody drifted through the air, simple and unadorned. Graham leaned back on the bench, closing his eyes, letting it wash over him. He saw Lillian for a fleeting second. The tilt of her head, the calm in her smile when she used to sing to him late at night, long before the hospital, before everything changed. But it was not painful this time. It was healing. When the song ended, Linda glanced at him shyly. "Sorry, habit." "Don't be," he said. "You make her feel safe. You make me feel like I remember what that's like." Linda looked down, a faint color touching her cheeks. That evening, they stopped by the bookstore to pick up something for Ava. The child was babbling, half words, half laughter. Graham knelt beside her stroller, fastening her blanket when she suddenly reached toward Linda, her voice wobbling through a sound neither of them expected. M. The syllable was unsteady, incomplete, but clear enough to make the world stop. Graham froze, his hand still on the buckle. He looked up at Linda, who stood motionless, her eyes wide, tears already welling. Ava reached again, saying it louder this time. "Mama." Linda's lips trembled. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice breaking. She knelt beside the stroller, pressing her forehead against Ava's tiny one. "No, baby, I'm not." Her sentence dissolved into quiet sobs. Graham did not move. His chest ached in a way that was both painful and profound. He wanted to say something, to tell her it was okay, that it meant something beautiful, not wrong, but words felt too fragile for the moment. Ava giggled, clapping her hands, oblivious to the storm she had just stirred. Linda wiped her eyes, smiling through tears. Graham reached for her hand without thinking, their fingers brushing lightly, grounding them both in the same wordless understanding. They stayed like that for a long time. Three people under the bookstore's soft lights, tethered together by something none of them could name. The leaves in Boise had just begun to turn gold when Linda started pulling away. It was subtle at first, a slower reply to a text, a soft excuse when Graham asked to meet after work. She still smiled when she saw him, still laughed when Ava reached for her, still sang lullabies like they were woven into her breath. But there was a quiet hesitation now, a layer of doubt she could not shake. It started the night Graham told her what he did. Not in a grand speech, not to impress her, just a passing mention at dinner. Something about overseeing a sustainable farming initiative across 3 states. Linda nodded, smiled politely, but something shifted inside her. CEO, wealth, success, everything. She was not. No degree, no plan, number 5-year vision board, just a job in a bookstore, a heart full of scars, and a voice that soothed crying children because no one had soothed her. What did she really have to offer a man like that? Days passed. The feeling grew heavier. The breaking point came on a sunny Sunday. Linda had taken Graham and Ava to a small farmer's market behind the library, a quiet place full of music, kettle corn, and hand-knitted scarves. They were standing near a honey vendor when someone called out, "Graham." A man in a sharp blazer approached, surprised and smiling. "I didn't know you were still in Boise." "James," Graham said, shaking his hand. "Yeah, just staying a few extra days." James glanced at Linda. She stood a little behind, holding Ava, a slight smile on her face. "This your?" James asked, then lowered his voice, clearly curious. Graham looked at Linda, about to respond. But James smirked and cut in. "She's not one of the consultants, is she?" he said lightly. "Just asking. Figured someone like you wouldn't be well running around with a girl who sings lullabies in bookstores." Linda's face palled. Graham started to speak something sharp, but Linda stepped in. "It's fine," she said softly. "Really?" She handed Ava gently to Graham. "I should get going anyway," Graham frowned. Linda, but she was already backing away with a small wave. Her smile polite practiced. That night, Linda sat at her kitchen table with a pen in her hand and tears on her cheeks. She wrote slowly, folding the letter and tucking it into the envelope with trembling fingers. To Ava, it read on the front. The next morning, she left the envelope with the clerk at the bookstore and did not come back. She did not say goodbye. She packed 2 bags and took the first bus out of Boise to a quiet town where no one knew her name. Graham returned to the bookstore 2 days later, Ava babbling on his hip, reaching excitedly for the bell above the door. But the store felt different. The usual warmth was missing. The clerk at the counter gave him a nervous smile. "She's gone," she said. "LFT this for you." She handed him the envelope. Graham opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a letter written in neat sloping handwriting. "Dear Ava, you will not remember me. Maybe that is for the best. I was never supposed to stay, only to help you sleep one night on a noisy plane, but you stayed in my heart far longer than I expected. You made me believe I could be more than what I thought I was. Thank you for letting me hold you. Thank you for your trust, and thank you for calling me Mama, even if just once. That word will echo in my soul forever. Love always, Linda." Graham sat down hard on the floor of the children's section, surrounded by storybooks and soft rugs. He did not care who saw him. Ava held the handkerchief Linda had once left in her stroller, a forgotten scrap of fabric embroidered with fading initials, and pressed it to her face. She would not let go. The countryside was quiet in a way Linda had forgotten existed. She spent her days pulling weeds from rows of tomatoes in her aunt's garden. Her hands always busy, her thoughts tangled in silence. The air smelled of earth and rosemary, and the nights were so still she could hear crickets breathe. It was the perfect place to disappear. And that was what she had wanted. No calls, no emails, no bookstore, no lullabies, just dirt under her fingernails and the ache of something she was trying to forget. She told her aunt little, only that she needed a break. Her aunt, wise and kind, asked no questions. She simply handed Linda a pair of gloves and a watering can. Days passed, and then one afternoon, as she stepped out of the shed with an armful of mint, she saw a car parked at the end of the long gravel drive. A tall figure stood beside it, holding a baby on his hip. Graham. Linda froze. He did not move closer. He just stood there. Ava nestled against him, looking as if he had been waiting there for hours. Maybe he had. She took a slow breath and walked toward them, the crunch of her boots on gravel, the only sound. When she reached them, her eyes flicked to Ava first. The baby lit up immediately, arms flailing, a joyful squeal escaping her mouth. Linda swallowed hard. How did you find me?" Graham looked down, then back at her. "The letter you left for Ava. You mentioned your aunt's name, and once you told me she had a garden big enough to get lost in." Linda blinked. She had not realized she had said so much. "I didn't think you'd come," she said, her voice barely there. "I wasn't sure I should," he admitted. "But I needed to say something." She waited. "If you ever thought you weren't enough," Graham said, stepping just a little closer. "You need to know this. She only ever truly settles when it's your voice singing to her." Linda looked at Ava, who was now reaching for her with such desperation. It broke whatever wall she had tried to build. She took her gently, holding her close. Ava tucked her head under Linda's chin, humming something only babies understood. Linda kissed the top of her head, her voice trembling as she asked, "Did you get the letter?" "I did," Graham said. "I've read it too many times." Linda nodded slowly, holding Ava tighter. And then, without thinking, she began to hum. The lullaby returned, not out of instinct or pain, but out of something deeper. This time it was not just for the baby. Her voice was soft, steady, and as she sang, her eyes lifted to Graham. He stood there completely still, his lips parted slightly, his chest rising and falling with the weight of too many feelings. There were no titles here. No CEO, no bookstore girl, no baggage of who they had been before. Just a man, a woman, and a child, and a song that seemed to mend something neither of them could name. When the final note faded, Ava had fallen asleep. Her small hand fisted around Linda's necklace. Linda exhaled, barely realizing she had been holding her breath. "I didn't know if I was allowed to hope," she said softly. Graham stepped forward, his voice rough but clear. "You don't need permission to be loved." Silence settled around them like a blanket, deep, safe, whole, and for the first time, no one ran. 1 year later, the little white cottage sat quietly at the edge of a lavender field. Its windows open to the breeze, its porch lined with mismatched chairs and potted herbs. Children's voices floated through the air, soft giggles, little feet in the grass. The occasional off-key note of a lullaby being practiced. Inside, the living room had been rearranged. The couch pushed aside, the rug cleared, a semicircle of folding chairs set up. Linda stood barefoot in the center, a picture book in one hand, a baby nestled against her shoulder. "Let's begin," she said, smiling at the group of young women before her, most holding babies of their own. Her voice was calm, her tone kind, the same tone she once used to read stories in a dusty bookstore in Boise. But now the room was hers, the moment was hers, the purpose was hers. Lullaby Circle met every Tuesday, a free program Linda had created for single mothers in the valley, offering storytime, lullaby coaching, a warm drink, and a place to breathe. It was small, simple, and quiet, but it was everything she had dreamed of without knowing. Behind the scenes, Graham quietly funded the entire operation through one of his community grants. No speeches, no credit, just books on shelves, blankets on floors, and someone to fix the roof when it leaked. He liked staying in the background. He liked watching Linda shine. Later that afternoon, after the moms had left and the house had gone still, Linda stepped into the lavender field behind the cottage. Ava ran ahead, her boots crushing flowers, her hair tangled with sun and wind. "Slow down, sweetheart," Linda called, laughing. "Okay, Mama," Ava called back, her voice ringing like a bell. Linda stopped walking. Even now, a year later, the words struck her chest like a soft drum beat. Not because it startled her, but because it had settled in so deeply, it felt like it had always been true. She was not the woman who had boarded that plane. Uncertain, invisible, running from what she lacked. She was a mother now, by choice, by heart. From the porch, Graham watched them, his hands dusty from fixing a shutter, his jeans stained with soil. He looked content in a way no boardroom ever gave him. Linda turned and smiled. He smiled back like it was the most natural thing in the world, because now it was. They did not live in a mansion. The cottage was small, the porch creaked, and the washer sometimes needed a nudge. But every morning Linda woke to lavender and little footsteps rushing into their room. And every night they closed the day not with declarations, but with quiet choices to stay, to listen, to love again. Love had not come like thunder. It had come like a lullaby, soft, repeating, reassuring. As the sun dipped behind the hills, Linda lifted Ava into her arms and hummed the familiar tune once more, letting the melody drift with the wind, settle into the sky, and disappear. She looked back at the cottage, at the man who had once been a stranger, now standing as the steady presence she had never dared hope for. "He once told me I calmed his daughter with a lullaby," Linda whispered. "But it was the two of them who taught me the first true song of family." If this story touched your heart even just a little, if you believe in quiet love, second chances, or the healing power of a lullaby, then maybe like Linda, you know that some families aren't born, they're chosen. At Soul-Stirring Stories, we share tales that heal, inspire, and remind us of the goodness still alive in the world. So, if this story moved you, please hit the hype button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a moment that could change how you see life, love, and yourself. Thank you for watching. See you next time.